The gray waters of the North Atlantic stretched endlessly in every direction as Captain Sarah Mitchell stood on the bridge of HMS Prince of Wales, watching the sun break through the morning clouds. After 8 months of deployment, the massive aircraft carrier was finally heading home to Portsmouth. The ship's steel hull cut through the waves with determination, carrying not just advanced military equipment, but the hopes and dreams of over 1,600 crew members who had been away from their families for what felt like a lifetime. Below deck, leading seaman James Thompson sat in his cramped quarters, carefully folding a letter he had written to his 5-year-old daughter Emma. It was the 47th letter he had written during this deployment, each one telling her about the adventures he was having while secretly hiding how much his heart ached to hold her again. James had joined the Royal Navy 12 years ago, following in his father's footsteps, but nothing had prepared him for how difficult it would be to miss his daughter's first day of school, her birthday, and countless bedtime stories. The news had come through earlier that morning during the daily briefing. Captain Mitchell had announced with barely contained emotion that King Charles and Queen Camilla would personally welcome them home at a special reception. The announcement had sent waves of excitement throughout the ship, but, for many of the crew, it represented something much deeper than royal recognition. It meant that their service, their sacrifice, and their families' sacrifices had been acknowledged at the highest level. Petty Officer Maria Santos stood in the ship's communications center, her hands trembling slightly as she prepared to make her weekly call home to her mother in Liverpool. Maria had been one of only a handful of women serving in the engine room when she first joined the Navy 15 years ago. Now, as a senior petty officer, she commanded respect from her colleagues, but the loneliness of being away from family never got easier. Her mother, Rosa, had been fighting cancer during this deployment, and every phone call carried the weight of uncertainty. As Maria dialed the familiar number, she could hear the excitement in the background conversations of her shipmates. The royal reception was all anyone could talk about. For many of these young sailors, it would be their first time meeting members of the royal family. But, for Maria, the thought of going home carried a different kind of nervousness. Would her mother be strong enough to attend the ceremony? Would the treatment have worked? These questions haunted her daily, making her focus on her duties even more intensely. In the ship's medical bay, Dr. Rebecca Walsh was conducting her final rounds of the day. As the chief medical officer aboard HMS Prince of Wales, she had seen everything during this deployment, from routine illnesses to serious injuries during training exercises. But what struck her most was the emotional toll the long separation had taken on the crew. She had counseled homesick sailors, treated stress-related symptoms, and had countless conversations with crew members worried about family situations they couldn't control from thousands of miles away. Dr. Walsh had her own reasons for wanting to get home. Her husband, Michael, had been managing their twin boys alone while also working as a teacher. Their video calls had become lifelines, but she could see the exhaustion in Michael's eyes growing with each passing week. The boys, now 8 years old, had started asking when Mommy was coming home with increasing frequency. Each time Michael deflected their questions, Dr. Walsh felt a piece of her heart break a little more. The ship's galley was buzzing with unusual energy as Chef Petty Officer David Kumar prepared the evening meal for the crew. Normally, mealtimes aboard a naval vessel followed strict routines, but tonight felt different. The crew was animated, sharing stories about their families, making plans for shore leave, and discussing the upcoming royal reception with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. David had his own emotional journey ahead of him. His wife, Priya, had given birth to their first child 3 months ago, a son they had named Arjun. David had only seen his boy through pixelated video calls and photographs that Priya sent whenever the ship's communication systems allowed. The thought of holding his son for the first time filled him with both overwhelming joy and unexpected anxiety. Would Arjun recognize his voice? Would he be a good father? These questions occupied his mind as he mechanically prepared meals for his shipmates. Lieutenant Commander Alexander Ross stood in the ship's operations center, coordinating the final preparations for their arrival in Portsmouth. As the ship's executive officer, he was responsible for ensuring that every detail of their homecoming went smoothly. But, beneath his professional demeanor, Alex was dealing with his own emotional storm. 3 weeks into the deployment, his wife Jennifer had asked for a separation. She said she couldn't handle the constant uncertainty, the missed anniversaries, and the feeling of being a single parent to their 12-year-old son, Oliver. The divorce papers had arrived via official mail 6 months ago. Alex had signed them in the privacy of his quarters, then returned to his duties as if nothing had happened. But the thought of going home to an empty apartment, of seeing Oliver only on weekends, made the approaching coastline of England feel less like a homecoming and more like facing a new kind of battle. As the evening shift change occurred, the ship settled into its nighttime rhythm. The steady hum of engines provided a constant backdrop to the quiet conversations happening in mess halls and corridors. Able seaman Sophie Chen sat in the ship's library, writing in her journal as she had done every night for the past 8 months. At 19, this had been her first major deployment, and she had documented every homesick moment, every small victory, and every lesson learned. Sophie's parents had immigrated to the UK from Hong Kong when she was 5 years old. Her decision to join the Royal Navy had been met with confusion from her extended family, but her parents had supported her choice to serve her adopted country. During this deployment, she had discovered a strength she never knew she possessed, but she had also learned that independence came with its own form of loneliness. The night watch settled into their positions as HMS Prince of Wales continued its journey through increasingly familiar waters. In his private cabin, Captain Mitchell reviewed the personnel files of her crew, knowing that each name represented a family waiting anxiously for their return. She had commanded naval vessels for over 20 years, but this deployment had been particularly challenging. International tensions had kept them at sea longer than originally planned, extending their separation from loved ones by nearly 2 months. As a single woman who had dedicated her life to naval service, Captain Mitchell understood sacrifice differently than many of her crew members. But watching the emotional toll on her sailors had taught her new lessons about leadership and compassion. The upcoming royal reception represented not just recognition of their military service, but acknowledgement of the families who had supported their mission from thousands of miles away. The ship's chaplain, Father Michael O'Brien, made his evening rounds, stopping to chat with crew members who seemed particularly contemplative. Some sailors attended his regular services, while others sought him out for private conversations about family worries, relationship concerns, or simply the challenge of readjusting to life on land after months at sea. Father O'Brien had served aboard naval vessels for 15 years, and he understood that homecoming could be just as emotionally challenging as deployment. Tonight, he found himself counseling young able seaman Chris Parker, whose girlfriend had written that she wasn't sure she could continue their relationship. Chris, barely 21 years old, was facing the possibility that the girl he had planned to propose to might not be waiting for him in Portsmouth. Father O'Brien listened patiently, offering guidance while knowing that some life changes couldn't be fixed with words or prayers. As midnight approached, the ship maintained its course through increasingly busy shipping lanes. The lights of passing vessels reminded the crew that they were approaching home waters. For many, sleep would not come easily tonight. The excitement of seeing loved ones was mixed with anxiety about how relationships might have changed, how children might have grown, and how they themselves had been transformed by months of military service in challenging conditions. In the communications center, radio operators maintained contact with naval headquarters in Portsmouth, coordinating arrival times and security protocols for the royal reception. The weight of representing the Royal Navy in front of King Charles and Queen Camilla was not lost on any crew member. They had spent weeks ensuring their uniforms were perfect, practicing ceremonial procedures, and preparing for what would be one of the most significant moments of their naval careers. The approaching dawn would bring them closer to English shores, closer to families who had counted days on calendars and marked time by weekly phone calls and precious emails. HMS Prince of Wales had served with distinction during this deployment, participating in international exercises, maintaining maritime security, and representing British interests across the globe. But, for the 1,600 souls aboard, the most important mission was now just hours away, coming home to the people they loved and who had waited faithfully for their return. As the night watch continued their vigilant duties, the great ship pressed forward through the darkness, carrying hopes, dreams, fears, and an unbreakable determination to complete their final mission, a safe homecoming to the families and nation they had served with honor and dedication. Dawn broke across the English Channel with a brilliant display of orange and gold, painting the waters around HMS Prince of Wales in warm hues that seemed to welcome the massive aircraft carrier home. Captain Sarah Mitchell had been awake since 4 a.m, standing on the bridge and watching the familiar coastline of southern England emerge from the morning mist. After 8 months of foreign ports and endless ocean horizons, the sight of home brought unexpected tears to her eyes. The ship's communication systems had been busy since sunrise, coordinating with Portsmouth Naval Base and Buckingham Palace representatives about the afternoon's royal reception. Every detail had to be perfect. King Charles and Queen Camilla would arrive at precisely 2 o'clock, and the crew had been practicing their ceremonial formations for weeks. But, beneath the formal protocols and military precision, a more personal drama was unfolding as 1,600 crew members prepared to reunite with their families. Leading seaman James Thompson stood in the ship's mess hall, nervously adjusting his dress uniform for the third time that morning. His hands shook slightly as he tried to knot his black silk necktie properly. In just a few hours, he would see his daughter Emma for the first time since her 4th birthday 8 months ago. His wife Sarah had sent videos showing Emma had lost 2 teeth and had grown at least 3 inches. Would she remember him? Would she run to him as she used to, or would there be awkward hesitation in her 5-year-old eyes? The breakfast conversation around James buzzed with similar anxieties and excitement. Able seaman Chris Parker sat quietly in the corner, picking at his eggs and toast. The letter from his girlfriend Katie had arrived 3 days ago, and he had read it so many times the paper was beginning to wear thin. She wanted to talk when he got home, which could mean anything. Chris had planned to propose during this shore leave, had even bought a ring before deployment. Now he wondered if he would be coming home to a celebration or a goodbye. In her quarters, Petty Officer Maria Santos carefully applied makeup to hide the dark circles under her eyes. She had spoken to her mother Rosa late last night, and the news was cautiously optimistic. The latest round of chemotherapy treatments seemed to be working, and Rosa was determined to attend the royal reception despite her doctor's concerns. Maria's hands trembled as she thought about seeing her mother's fragile frame, knowing how much weight Rosa had lost during the cancer treatments. Maria had been sending most of her naval pay home to help with her mother's medical expenses, living on the bare minimum aboard ship. Her mother never complained, never asked for money directly, but Maria could hear the stress in Rosa's voice during their weekly phone calls. The Royal Navy provided excellent healthcare, but civilian treatments often required supplements that stretched family budgets thin. Maria had volunteered for every overtime shift available, working in the engine room 16 hours a day sometimes, just to send a few extra pounds home. Dr. Rebecca Walsh was conducting her final medical inspections in the ship's hospital bay when a young sailor knocked on her door. Seaman Tommy Fletcher, barely 19 years old, stood nervously in the doorway asking for seasickness medication. Dr. Walsh quickly realized that Tommy wasn't seasick, he was suffering from severe anxiety about seeing his parents again. Tommy had joined the Navy straight from school, partly to escape a difficult home situation involving his father's drinking problem. As Dr. Walsh talked gently with Tommy, she learned that his father had been attending Alcoholics Anonymous meetings for the past 6 months, inspired by his son's decision to serve his country. Tommy's mother had written that his father was a changed man, but Tommy was terrified of being disappointed again. Dr. Walsh prescribed mild anxiety medication and spent an extra 30 minutes talking Tommy through breathing exercises, knowing that emotional preparation was just as important as physical health. Meanwhile, Dr. Walsh's own nerves were getting the better of her. Her husband Michael had sounded exhausted during their last video call, and the twins had seemed more distant than usual. 8-year-old boys changed quickly, and she worried that she had missed crucial developmental moments. Michael had assured her everything was fine, but she could see the strain in his face. Being a single parent while working full-time as a teacher had clearly taken its toll, and Dr. Walsh felt guilty for pursuing her naval career at her family's expense. In the ship's galley, Chef Petty Officer David Kumar was preparing his last meal service aboard HMS Prince of Wales before shore leave. His assistant chefs noticed that David kept checking his phone, looking at the photos of baby Arjun that his wife Priya sent daily. The baby's face was changing rapidly, developing from the wrinkled newborn David had seen via video call to a chubby, alert 3-month-old who seemed to smile more each day. David had prepared a special surprise for Priya. He had been taking cooking classes via correspondence during the deployment, learning to make traditional Indian dishes that Priya's grandmother used to prepare. He wanted to cook for his new family, to show Priya that he was committed to being not just a provider but a partner in creating a home. The spice packets hidden in his personal belongings represented months of planning and hope for their future together. Lieutenant Commander Alexander Ross stood in his quarters, packing his belongings into regulation sea bags with mechanical precision. Everything he owned fit into 2 bags, a stark reminder of how his personal life had been reduced to essentials. The divorce papers were filed away in his official documents folder, next to custody agreements that allowed him to see Oliver every other weekend and Wednesday evenings. Alex had been trying to prepare himself emotionally for this new reality, but nothing about divorce felt natural or acceptable. He loved being a father more than he loved being a naval officer, but the Navy was all he knew professionally. At 38 years old, starting over felt overwhelming. He had written Oliver a long letter explaining the situation, but 12-year-old boys didn't always understand adult complications. Alex worried that Oliver might blame him for the family's dissolution. The ship's corridors filled with crew members making final preparations for arrival. Uniforms were pressed to perfection, shoes polished until they reflected like mirrors, and personal belongings organized for quick transfer to shore leave accommodations. The excitement was palpable, but so was the nervous energy that comes with major life transitions. Able seaman Sophie Chen sat in the ship's recreation area, video calling her parents for what would be their last conversation before reunion. Her father, who had never quite understood her decision to join the Navy, now spoke with obvious pride about his daughter's service. Her mother showed her the newspaper clippings she had saved about HMS Prince of Wales' deployment, creating a scrapbook of Sophie's first major naval assignment. Sophie had changed during these 8 months at sea. The shy teenager who had left Portsmouth had developed into a confident young woman who could handle emergency situations, work effectively in teams, and make decisions under pressure. But she was also eager to reconnect with the parts of herself that had nothing to do with military service, the girl who loved art, who enjoyed long walks through Liverpool's parks with her parents, who dreamed of traveling the world as a civilian someday. Father Michael O'Brien made his final rounds through the ship, offering blessings and encouragement to crew members who requested his spiritual support. Some sailors had found faith during the long months at sea, while others had struggled with questions about purpose and meaning. Father O'Brien understood that military service often forced people to confront fundamental questions about life, death, duty, and love. He had received word that morning that several family members would be attending the royal reception, including some who had never visited a naval base before. For many families, seeing HMS Prince of Wales up close would be their first real understanding of where their loved ones had been living and working. The massive scale of the aircraft carrier, the complexity of its operations, and the dedication required to serve aboard such a vessel often surprised civilian family members. Captain Mitchell called a final crew meeting at 11 o'clock, gathering her officers in the ship's main briefing room. She looked around at faces that had become familiar over months of shared challenges and successes. These men and women had served with distinction, maintaining the highest standards of military professionalism while dealing with personal sacrifices that civilians rarely understood. The captain's speech was brief but heartfelt. She thanked each department for their dedication, acknowledged the families who had supported the mission from home, and reminded everyone that they were representing not just the Royal Navy but the entire nation during the royal reception. She also privately acknowledged to herself that this crew had taught her new lessons about leadership, resilience, and the human cost of military service. As HMS Prince of Wales approached the outer channels of Portsmouth Harbour, tugboats began positioning themselves to guide the massive carrier to its berth. On the docks, families had been gathering since dawn despite the formal reception not beginning until afternoon. Children held welcome home signs, wives clutched flowers, and parents stood with quiet pride watching their sons and daughters return from serving their country. The ship's arrival was being broadcast live on naval radio frequencies, allowing family members to follow their loved ones' progress mile by mile. The excitement on shore was building toward an emotional crescendo that would soon reunite families separated by duty, distance, and the demands of military service. HMS Prince of Wales was coming home, carrying with it months of memories, personal growth, and the hopes of everyone who had waited patiently for this moment. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Portsmouth Naval Base as HMS Prince of Wales slowly maneuvered into her home berth, guided by experienced tugboat captains who had welcomed countless naval vessels home from deployment. But today felt different. The pier was decorated with royal standards, red carpets had been rolled out, and security personnel in formal dress uniforms created ceremonial corridors for the anticipated arrival of King Charles and Queen Camilla. Captain Sarah Mitchell stood at attention on the ship's bridge, watching through binoculars as the royal convoy approached the naval base. 3 black Bentleys moved in precise formation, followed by security vehicles and media trucks. In 30 minutes, she would have the honor of presenting her crew to the monarch, but right now she was focused on the hundreds of family members gathered behind security barriers, many holding signs and flowers, all scanning the ship's decks for glimpses of their loved ones. The royal motorcade arrived at exactly 2 o'clock, and King Charles emerged from the lead vehicle wearing a dark navy suit with military decorations. Queen Camilla followed, dressed in an elegant blue coat that complemented the naval setting. Both monarchs moved with practiced grace toward the reception platform, but their faces showed genuine warmth and anticipation for meeting the returning sailors and their families. Leading seaman James Thompson stood in formation on the ship's flight deck with his fellow crew members, but his eyes kept searching the crowd of families gathered on the pier below. Finally, he spotted them, his wife Sarah holding 5-year-old Emma's hand, both wearing their best dresses and waving frantically when they saw him looking their way. Emma had grown so much that James barely recognized her, and she was wearing the princess costume he had sent from a port visit to Gibraltar, complete with a sparkly tiara. The formal ceremonies began with Captain Mitchell presenting HMS Prince of Wales' deployment report to King Charles, summarizing 8 months of international cooperation, training exercises, and diplomatic missions that had enhanced Britain's maritime presence around the world. But, as she spoke about operational successes and strategic achievements, her eyes occasionally drifted to her crew members, knowing that the real stories of this deployment were personal ones of sacrifice, growth, and endurance. King Charles listened intently to the captain's report, asking detailed questions about the ship's capabilities and the crew's experiences during their deployment. His interest was clearly genuine, and when he learned about the extended deployment due to international tensions, he expressed sincere appreciation for the additional sacrifice made by both the crew and their families. Queen Camilla stood beside him, occasionally nodding and smiling at crew members who caught her eye. As the formal presentations concluded, the royal couple began walking among the assembled crew members, stopping to speak personally with sailors from different departments. King Charles approached Petty Officer Maria Santos, who stood at rigid attention despite her internal nervousness. When he asked about her role in the ship's engine room, Maria's voice initially trembled, but she gained confidence as she explained the technical challenges of maintaining propulsion systems during long ocean crossings. What Maria didn't expect was Queen Camilla asking about her family. When Maria mentioned her mother's cancer treatment, Queen Camilla's expression softened with genuine concern. She spent several minutes asking about Rosa's condition and treatment, showing a personal interest that moved Maria to tears. Queen Camilla placed a gentle hand on Maria's shoulder and said she hoped to meet Rosa during the family reception later that afternoon. Dr. Rebecca Walsh had been selected to brief the royal couple about the medical challenges of maintaining crew health during extended deployments. As she spoke about everything from routine medical care to emergency procedures, King Charles asked thoughtful questions about the psychological support available to sailors missing their families. Dr. Walsh found herself talking about the emotional toll of separation, not just on crew members but on the families waiting at home. Queen Camilla was particularly interested in the support systems for military families, especially children who had to cope with a parent's extended absence. Dr. Walsh mentioned several crew members who had missed significant family milestones, births, first steps, school plays, and birthday parties. Queen Camilla made notes in a small leather journal, clearly planning to address these concerns in future royal patronage activities. Meanwhile, on the pier below, families watched the royal proceedings with mixture of pride and impatience. They could see their loved ones in formation on the ship's deck, but the formal ceremonies meant they would have to wait several more hours for actual reunions. Children grew restless despite their parents' explanations about the importance of the royal visit, and several families had brought snacks and folding chairs for the long wait. Lieutenant Commander Alexander Ross found himself speaking with King Charles about the challenges of naval leadership during complex international operations. As they discussed decision-making under pressure and the responsibility of commanding military personnel in potentially dangerous situations, Alex felt a profound sense of validation for his career choice. Even though his personal life was in shambles, his professional service was being recognized at the highest level. King Charles seemed to understand the personal sacrifices required for military leadership, asking Alex directly about the impact of naval service on family relationships. Alex answered honestly about the difficulties, including his recent divorce, but emphasized that most naval families found ways to make their relationships work despite the challenges. The king's thoughtful nod suggested he understood the complex balance between duty and personal happiness. Chef Petty Officer David Kumar was invited to explain the logistics of feeding 1,600 crew members during extended ocean deployments. Queen Camilla was fascinated by the galley operations, asking about dietary restrictions, cultural food preferences, and the challenge of maintaining morale through good meals when sailors were homesick. David found himself talking about how cooking reminded him of his wife Priya and how he had learned new recipes during deployment to surprise his family. Queen Camilla laughed warmly when David mentioned learning to make traditional Indian sweets via video calls with Priya's grandmother. She asked if he planned to cook for his new baby, and David's face lit up as he talked about 3-month-old Arjun. Queen Camilla listened with the genuine interest of someone who understood the importance of family traditions, especially for military families who spent so much time apart. Able seaman Sophie Chen was nervous when King Charles stopped to speak with her, but his questions about her experience as a young sailor put her at ease. He asked about her training, her future naval ambitions, and what she had learned during her first major deployment. Sophie found herself talking about personal growth, about discovering strengths she didn't know she possessed, and about representing her family and her community through military service. King Charles was particularly interested when Sophie mentioned her parents' immigration story and their pride in her naval service. He spoke briefly about the importance of military service in bringing together people from all backgrounds in service to their country. Sophie felt a surge of pride not just for herself but for her parents, who had worked so hard to build a life in Britain and now saw their daughter serving the nation they had chosen as home. The formal deck ceremonies lasted nearly 2 hours, with King Charles and Queen Camilla taking time to speak personally with crew members from every department. They met with engineers, communications specialists, flight deck personnel, weapons technicians, and administrative staff. Each conversation was brief but meaningful, with both monarchs showing genuine interest in the individuals who kept HMS Prince of Wales operational during its deployment. Father Michael O'Brien had the honor of offering a blessing for the ship and crew during the royal visit. As he spoke about service, sacrifice, and safe homecomings, many crew members thought about their own spiritual journeys during the deployment. Some had found faith during difficult moments at sea, while others had strengthened existing beliefs through the discipline and camaraderie of naval life. Queen Camilla was particularly moved by Father O'Brien's prayer for military families, especially children who had grown and changed while their parents served overseas. She had spoken with several crew members about missing important family events, and she clearly understood that military service extracted a price from entire families, not just the individuals in uniform. As the formal ceremonies concluded, King Charles addressed the assembled crew with a speech that balanced official recognition with personal warmth. He thanked them for their service during a challenging international deployment, acknowledged the sacrifices made by their families, and praised their professionalism in representing Britain around the world. His words were formal but heartfelt, delivered with the authority of someone who understood both the importance and the cost of military service. Queen Camilla then spoke to the crew about their families, acknowledging the children who had missed bedtime stories, the spouses who had managed households alone, and the parents who had worried constantly about their sons and daughters serving far from home. Her words brought tears to many eyes, both among the crew and the families watching from the pier below. The royal couple concluded their official visit by walking the length of the ship's flight deck, stopping to shake hands and exchange brief words with crew members they hadn't spoken to during the formal presentations. The atmosphere was relaxed but respectful, with sailors clearly moved by the personal attention from their monarch and his wife. As King Charles and Queen Camilla prepared to depart, Captain Mitchell presented them with a commemorative plaque from HMS Prince of Wales, signed by the entire crew. In return, King Charles presented the ship with a royal standard that would fly alongside the white ensign, symbolizing the monarch's personal recognition of the crew's exemplary service during their deployment. The royal motorcade departed promptly at 4:30, leaving behind a crew that felt deeply honored by the recognition they had received. But, for most of the sailors, the real celebration was just beginning. Within minutes of the royal departure, the ship's gangways were lowered, and families began streaming aboard for the emotional reunions they had been anticipating for 8 long months. The moment the ship's gangways were lowered, Portsmouth Naval Base transformed into a scene of pure emotional chaos. 8 months of separation ended in seconds as families rushed aboard HMS Prince of Wales, searching desperately for their loved ones among the hundreds of sailors in identical uniforms. Children screamed with excitement, adults wept openly, and the formal military atmosphere dissolved into something beautifully human and raw. Leading seaman James Thompson spotted his wife Sarah and daughter Emma before they saw him, and he broke into a run despite regulations about maintaining composure on deck. Emma, now 5 years old and barely recognizable from the 4-year-old he had left behind, hesitated for just a moment when she saw this tall man in uniform running toward her. Then, recognition dawned across her face, and she broke free from her mother's hand, running as fast as her little legs could carry her. The collision was everything James had dreamed about during lonely nights at sea. Emma launched herself into his arms with such force that he stumbled backward, but he held her tight against his chest, feeling how much she had grown, how solid she felt compared to the tiny girl he remembered. She smelled like strawberry shampoo and chocolate, and when she pulled back to look at his face, he could see she was missing more teeth than just the 2 he knew about from photos. Sarah Thompson reached them a moment later, and, for a few seconds, the 3 of them just held each other without speaking. 8 months of phone calls and video chats had kept them connected, but nothing compared to actually being together again. Sarah had lost weight from stress and single parenting, but her eyes were bright with relief and joy. James noticed that Emma was wearing the princess dress he had sent from Gibraltar, and she immediately began telling him about everything that had happened while he was away, talking so fast that her words tumbled over each other in excitement. Across the deck, Petty Officer Maria Santos was searching the crowd for her mother Rosa when she heard a familiar voice calling her name. She turned to see Rosa standing with Maria's Aunt Carmen, looking fragile but determined. Rosa had lost significant weight during her chemotherapy treatments, and her hair was hidden under a colorful headscarf, but her smile was radiant as she opened her arms to her daughter. Maria approached slowly, almost afraid to embrace her mother too tightly, but Rosa pulled her close with surprising strength. They stood together for several minutes, both crying, both grateful to be reunited after the most difficult year of their lives. Rosa whispered in Spanish about how proud she was, how the royal couple had specifically asked about her health, and how she had been determined to attend this reception despite her doctor's concerns. Carmen stood nearby, taking photos and wiping away her own tears. She had helped care for Rosa during the worst of the chemotherapy sessions, and she understood better than anyone what this reunion meant. Maria looked at her mother's thin face and saw the determination that had carried Rosa through months of cancer treatment, sustained by weekly phone calls from her daughter and the knowledge that Maria was serving her country with honor. Dr. Rebecca Walsh found her family near the ship's medical bay, where her husband Michael was trying to manage 2 excited 8-year-old boys who wanted to explore everything on the aircraft carrier immediately. The twins, Daniel and Christopher, had grown noticeably during her absence, and both boys seemed slightly shy when she knelt down to embrace them. 8 months was a long time in a child's life, and Dr. Walsh realized that rebuilding their close relationship might take some time. Michael looked exhausted but relieved as he hugged his wife for the first time in months. He had been maintaining their household, working full-time as a teacher, and raising twin boys essentially as a single parent. The strain showed in his face, but so did his pride in Rebecca's naval service. As they talked, interrupted constantly by the boys' questions about the ship, Dr. Walsh realized how much her family had sacrificed for her career and how grateful she was for their support. The boys were fascinated by their mother's medical bay, asking detailed questions about her equipment and demanding to know if she had performed any dramatic surgeries during deployment. Dr. Walsh found herself laughing as she explained routine medical procedures to her sons, watching their faces light up with excitement about their mother's important work. Their enthusiasm helped ease the awkwardness of reunion after such a long separation. Lieutenant Commander Alexander Ross stood alone on the ship's upper deck, watching other families reunite while waiting for his 12-year-old son Oliver to arrive with Alex's ex-wife Jennifer. The divorce had been finalized during deployment, and this would be their first meeting as a single-parent family. Alex had prepared himself for this moment, But nothing could really ease the pain of seeing his marriage's end reflected in his son's confused face. Oliver arrived with Jennifer at exactly 5 o'clock, and Alex immediately noticed how much his son had grown. Oliver was nearly as tall as his mother now, and his voice had started changing. Alex knelt down to embrace his son, but Oliver's response was hesitant, uncertain. 8 months of absence combined with the family upheaval had clearly affected their relationship, and Alex realized that rebuilding trust with his son would be his most important mission in the coming months. Jennifer remained polite but distant, acknowledging Alex's service while maintaining the emotional boundaries necessary for their new arrangement. She had brought Oliver's school photos and report cards, trying to share the milestones that Alex had missed, but the conversation felt stilted and formal. Oliver seemed torn between excitement about seeing his father and confusion about why his parents couldn't be together anymore. Chef Petty Officer David Kumar's reunion with his wife Priya was complicated by the presence of 3-month-old Arjun, who had never seen his father in person. David approached slowly, overwhelmed by the reality of meeting his son for the first time. Priya placed the baby gently in David's arms, and, for a moment, father and son studied each other with mutual curiosity. Arjun was bigger than David had expected from photos, with alert brown eyes and a serious expression that reminded David of his own baby pictures. When the baby smiled for the first time, David felt his heart expand in ways he hadn't anticipated. Priya watched her husband fall in love with their son, and she felt her own relief at having the family together again. The long months of single parenting while David served overseas had been challenging, but seeing father and son together made everything worthwhile. David had brought gifts from various ports of call during the deployment, but the most meaningful present was the collection of recipes he had learned to cook for his family. He showed Priya the carefully written instructions for traditional dishes from her grandmother, explaining how he had practiced cooking via video calls during quiet moments aboard ship. Priya was moved to tears by the effort he had made to connect with their family traditions while serving his country. Able seaman Sophie Chen found her parents waiting near the ship's communication center, and their reunion was emotional in its own quiet way. Her father, who had initially questioned her decision to join the Navy, now stood with obvious pride as he embraced his daughter. Her mother had prepared a scrapbook of newspaper clippings about HMS Prince of Wales deployment, creating a permanent record of Sophie's first major naval assignment. Sophie's parents marveled at the confidence their daughter had developed during 8 months at sea. The shy 19-year-old who had left Portsmouth had returned as a poised young woman who spoke confidently about her naval duties and future career plans. They walked together through the ship, with Sophie explaining her daily routines and introducing her parents to shipmates who had become like family during the deployment. Her parents were particularly impressed when several senior officers stopped to praise Sophie's dedication and professionalism. For immigrants who had worked hard to build a life in Britain, seeing their daughter earn respect through military service validated their decision to make the UK their permanent home. Sophie's success reflected not just her individual growth but her family's successful integration into British society. Father Michael O'Brien moved through the reunion crowds, offering blessings and support to families who requested his assistance. Some reunions were completely joyful, while others carried complications of changed relationships, financial stress, or health problems that had developed during deployment. Father O'Brien understood that homecoming could be just as emotionally challenging as departure, requiring spiritual and practical support for successful family reintegration. He spent particular time with families facing difficult circumstances, parents dealing with elderly grandparents who had declined during deployment, spouses who had struggled with depression while managing households alone, and children who had behavioral problems related to missing their military parent. Father O'Brien's role extended beyond religious services to practical counseling and connection with community support resources. Captain Sarah Mitchell watched the reunion activities from her bridge, feeling a deep satisfaction at seeing her crew reconnected with their loved ones. Command of HMS Prince of Wales had been the pinnacle of her naval career, but watching these personal reunions reminded her why military service mattered beyond strategic objectives and operational successes. These sailors had served their country while making personal sacrifices that touched entire families and communities. As evening approached, families began leaving the ship for private reunions at home, but many lingered, reluctant to end this perfect day. Children explored the aircraft carrier with wide-eyed wonder, spouses toured their loved ones' workspaces, and parents took countless photos of their sons and daughters in uniform against the backdrop of impressive naval technology. The reunion activities continued well into the evening, with impromptu celebrations in the ship's mess halls, tours of the flight deck under Portsmouth's harbor lights, and countless conversations as families caught up on 8 months of separation. For most crew members, this was just the beginning of shore leave that would allow proper time for readjustment and reconnection. Some reunions carried shadows of changed circumstances, relationships strained by separation, children who needed time to reconnect with absent parents, and the challenge of readjusting to civilian life after months of military routine. But overwhelming, the day was filled with joy, relief, and gratitude for service completed and families reunited. HMS Prince of Wales settled into her home berth as darkness fell over Portsmouth Naval Base, her crew finally reconnected with the loved ones who had sustained them through 8 months of deployment. The royal reception had provided formal recognition of their service, but these personal reunions represented the real reward for duty well done, coming home to the people who made their sacrifice meaningful and worthwhile. The great ship would soon undergo maintenance and preparation for future deployments, and many of these same crew members would eventually sail away again in service to their country. But tonight, HMS Prince of Wales was truly home, her crew surrounded by the families whose love and support had carried them through months of separation and service on distant seas.